everybody. So, as part of Permitting Month here at the Congressional Western Caucus, I've invited my good friend and former Western Caucus member and colleague in the U.S. House of Representatives, Mr. Ryan Zinke, who, as you know, comes from the great state of Montana, served in Congress from 2015 through 2017, and then also as our Secretary of the United States Department of Interior from 2017 through 2019. I'm looking at you for corrections in case I messed that up. So welcome, Ryan. Great to have you with us today on Permitting Month with the Western Caucus to talk a little bit about some of your experiences and some of the things that you witnessed, not only as a congressman, but also as a secretary. So for our listeners, share with us, if you could, just a little bit about your extensive public service record.
My background, grew up in Montana, played ball at University of Oregon, so I see the Cougar in the corner, and we split. So we won 2 out of the 4 years, but lost 2. And then I became a Navy SEAL. So I was 23 years. I was a commander at SEAL Team 6. Then I was a state senator in Montana.
I'd forgotten that. You
were for a short tour, a 4-year tour, and then joined you in the House of Representatives. Sat with you on House Resources.
That's right.
And then I was over in Armed Services. And then President Trump asked me to be the 52nd Secretary of Interior.
You've got like I said, the best perspective of almost anyone I can think of to talk about some of these challenges, because I think of any agency, Department of Interior plays a huge role in the whole permitting process of allowing things to happen in this country. You touched on it some within the agency. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you found in communities around the country when it came to issuing permits and that process involved in that?
Well, the permitting process is broke. We should be able to make a decision in a reasonable amount of time and give a thumbs up and thumbs down on a project. But I give this analogy. Let's say you have a salmon and a trout in the same stream. Northwest, it happens all the time.
Yeah, it does.
Right? And let's say upstream, you have a Forest Service holding. Happens all the time in the Northwest. Downstream, you probably have a dam system there. And then probably along the way, you're going to have an Indian reservation with a water compact.
Sounds like you're describing my area.
Right. So this is how it's managed. So the trout are under Department of Interior, under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The salmon are actually under Department of Commerce through NOAA. Now, upstream, the Forest Service holding is interesting because Forest Service itself is Department of Ag on the surface, except subsurface is Department of Interior through Bureau of Land Management. Now, the water systems are interesting because it doesn't matter about watershed. What it matters about when the project was initiated. In Washington, you have dams that are controlled by Department of Interior through Bureau of Reclamation, and also Department of Army through U.S. Army Corps in the same system. And then a water compact is a trifecta of excellence between the state, Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the tribe themselves because they're sovereign. Same stream. You're going to have multiple agencies under different leaderships with different objectives to make a permit, and you wonder why we can't get things done. Is that we need to unify that effort and decide whether a project should go forward or not, and I would say we can make that decision in 6 months.
Wow. So you've got essentially competing agencies, different objectives in mind, sometimes, not always probably, sometimes they're aligned, but probably universally unwilling to give ground on authority.
Absolutely. And as you know, it's all about power and control in this city and not necessarily better outcomes or efficiency. So the process on permitting, we need to make sure it's efficient and it's appropriate because, again, if you're going to even replace a bridge, the permitting process on replacing a existing bridge, maybe years, 7 or 8 years, and of course costs rise, and the bridge doesn't get better anytime soon. If it needs to be replaced, let's replace it.
Wow. That helps us understand a little bit about these challenges. So you, like I said, you almost were describing my area in your facetious
Well,
example.
that was intentional
Okay.
because Washington State has all of the
All of the
what it
above.
described.
Yeah. So I'll give you a chance to talk a little bit about your home state. Are there examples of permitting challenges in the great state of Montana?
Well, there's certainly, especially in natural resources,
Yeah.
mines, and recently, when COVID, it exposed vulnerabilities in our supply chain. Medical equipment, we didn't have manufacturing here. We have cobalt, and of course, with the Ukrainian crisis, supply chains come up again with palladium, with heavy crudes, with a lot of materials, especially raw materials that Russia has either a corner on or a significant market share. But in the U.S., we're blessed with enormous fertilizer reserves and potash. We're blessed with a number of critical minerals that we went through. But yes, we're blessed with them, but it doesn't do a lot of good unless you have access to them. And a lot of it is making sure that we're not beholden to foreign entities for our energy needs, because energy is the center of the economy, but also things that we use and the critical components that drive the economy, lithium and cobalt and those things that are critical to batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's no secret, Ryan, in your absence from Congress, and now I'm chairman of the Western Caucus, we've been pretty critical of the Biden administration and some of the decisions that they've been making, especially as it relates to energy, permitting energy projects, moving forward with domestic production. It seems as though, and this, I don't think this is just paranoia talking, because I can give you some examples. It seems as though many of the, what I would say, good things that happened while you were cabinet secretary, while Mr. Trump was in office, have been walked back, reversed, and then a lot of times for political reasons, which is unfortunate because I think we made some really good progress. Could you give us your evaluation of this administration's efforts in relating to the topic at hand here? Have they made any improvements in the permitting system, making it harder? Tell us a little bit about your thoughts.
Well, on energy, because energy is central to the economy. You're looking at high inflation rates, and inflation steals from everybody. Inflation, the government says it's 7.5. Not on the things that matter to Montana: energy, fuel, groceries, steel. So we're all about 15% poorer as a result of inflation, and what's driving it, a lot of the cases, is energy and excessive spending, but energy.
Yeah.
So when I came in as secretary, we were 8.3 million barrels a day in production and declining. After 2 short years, we were 12.5 million barrels a day and the world's largest exporter of energy.
Energy independent.
And I would say we were approaching energy dominance. And so, why is it important? Well, first, environmentally. And the state of Washington is very sensitive to the environment.
Yeah.
But it is better to produce energy in this country under our regulatory framework than watch it get produced overseas with no regulation.
Yeah.
Russian fuel is not even close. It's probably 40% dirtier across the board. Our fuels burn cleaner. So environmentally, it's better to produce energy here. And then I spent 23 years of my life in the SEALs. And a lot of that was fighting overseas for someone else's energy. Mm. And Dan, I've seen things that I don't want your kids, your grandchildren ever to see. So being beholden to a foreign entity and having to send troops to protect someone else's energy, I prefer we don't. Yeah. And lastly, energy drives the economy, particularly in the supply chain. We talked about why we need manufacturing in this country, and what makes it competitive. So you have the components, you have raw materials, and steel's about the same in South Korea as it is in Pittsburgh. You have labor costs. We can't compete on labor costs, nor should we with India or China. We're going to pay our workers,
Right.
a living wage. But where we can be competitive is we're innovative, but it's the energy component. Is when our energy prices are low in this country because we're using our resources, then we can bridge that gap of competitiveness and solve our issues on being vulnerable in our supply chain. Energy, I think, is the key to it. And I'm not fossil fuel centric. I'm all the above.
Okay.
But every type of energy has its consequences. Wind, the components when you look at the carbon footprint of wind and the damage it does to birds, because wind is generally in flyways where corridors where migration routes are. That's why there's wind, and the birds figured it out first. But and solar cells are great. But when you're taking up, and some of these proposals are 500 square miles of federal land for a solar field, that means that's a single use on land. You're not going to be able to recreate on it.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to hunt on it. And I can tell you the habitat, when you have a solar field on it, is not particularly inviting for our species. I think we should accelerate liquid natural gas. I think gas is clean. And we should follow, actually, France's lead on reinvigorating our nuclear power capability.
Yeah. I would, coming from a very pro-nuclear area, I would agree with that. And plus, all those things would lead to less dependence on those foreign sources, like you said.
And we can do it on the permitting. Where I find fault with this administration is they immediately put a moratorium on offshore leasing and onshore. The Keystone Pipeline.
Exactly.
In order to get out of this box, what we should be doing is we should accelerate the permitting on the Keystone. And there is a message behind the Keystone because a barrel of oil is just not a barrel of oil. Is that our refineries down in Houston and a lot of our country depend on heavier crudes to mix. We used to get it from Venezuela, and we no longer do. So the heavy crudes that go in and mix in order for refineries to operate come from Brazil, they come from Venezuela, they come from Russia, and that's why we were importing heavier crudes from Russia and Canada. So when Venezuela is out, as it should be, Iranian crude is out, the alternatives for us are Canada, bring across Brazil, and then accelerate the National Petroleum Reserve. This is not the ANWR, the National Petroleum Reserve on the west slope of Alaska to bring that heavier crude down. Right now it's all coming down, but it's going to the west coast. And we don't have a pipeline from the west coast to Houston, and we should have a pipeline from Houston to the coast, shipping natural gas, and we should have a pipeline also that allows us, if necessary, and if it's important for national security, to move heavier fuels to where our refining capacity is.
So that leads me to probably my last question, Ryan. All these things from a perspective of a secretary, you're starting to change your where you're looking, your vantage point, and thinking again about Congress. What can we do as members of the Western Caucus, members of Congress, to help facilitate some of these changes? That some of these decisions have to, we can influence, but they're made in the executive branch. So what can we do?
Well, we are an equal. The legislative is an equal branch of government.
Absolutely.
I think the power of the purse has been undervalued. Going back to regular order and doing the appropriations. And what appropriations for the listeners do is that you can authorize in policy, but the funding itself has to be appropriated. You have to put money in the account. Putting money in that account can come in two sources. One is that we can look at a particular piece of a regulatory framework that we find harmful to national interest or harmful to a state. We can zero that out in the budget, meaning the government cannot spend any money enforcing it.
Right.
They can't spend any money in monitoring it. So some of the regulatory of what we find to be counterproductive, we can zero them out, and also we can add money for programs that we believe will help in energy and some of the key components. But Congress needs to exercise their authority too as an equal branch of the government. And if there's a court case we don't like, then we can look at looking at the law to make sure it reflects the interest of the country.
Awesome. Well, Mr. Secretary, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate very much you taking some time to do this, and let me just say, I look forward to hearing more from you very soon.
I enjoyed it. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Ryan. Good.